So, how does one single artist completely flip the script on an entire decade of music? In the early 2000s, hip hop had a certain look, a certain sound, a certain story you were supposed to tell. This is the story of how a producer from Chicago with a backpack and a pink polo shirt basically took the rulebook, set it on fire, and then wrote his own. This is his blueprint. And it's funny because his biggest cosign was also his biggest skeptic. Even Jay-Z, the head of Rockefeller Records, Kanye's own mentor, just couldn't see it. He basically said, look, we all grew up as street guys. And then you've got Kanye, who's never hustled a day in his life. The whole idea of a middle-class kid rapping about college debt and working at the Gap, it just didn't make sense in a world that was all about bulletproof vests and stories from the block. You have to remember, the early 2000s were absolutely dominated by gangster rap. That was the aesthetic, hard beats, street stories. Kanye was this super ambitious outsider, right? An absolutely phenomenal producer who was just fighting to get his own voice heard on the mic. But the labels, they didn't get it. He even said he'd leave meetings literally crying all the time. Okay, now look at this timeline right here. In just a couple of years, he goes from landing one single track on a Jay-Z album to producing almost half of an instant classic, The Blueprint. I mean, he was crafting the sound of the entire era. He was making hits for everybody. Jay-Z, Ludacris, Alicia Keys. If you wanted a hit, you wanted a Kanye beat. He had that Midas touch. So yeah, Rockefeller signed him, but it was mostly just to keep that sound in-house. He was still battling to be seen as more than just the guy behind the mixing board. And then, fate just steps in the most brutal way possible. A head-on car crash nearly kills him, leaves him with a totally shattered jaw. I mean, a moment like that could have ended his career before it even really started. But instead, it became the single most important catalyst in his entire story. It just lit this fire under him, this raw urgency, because he realized his time could be up at any moment. So here's the crucial part, what he did next. Just a few weeks after that crash, with his mouth literally wired shut, he walks into his studio and records Through the Wire. You can actually hear the struggle in his voice, right? That muffled delivery. It wasn't just a song, it was proof. It was a testament on wax that absolutely nothing was going to stop him from telling his story in his own voice. And that single, a track born out of pure defiance, became the bedrock for his debut album. And with it, man, he introduced a sound that was so unique, so warm, and just so different that it would completely rewrite the rules for what mainstream hip-hop could even be. He called his signature sound chipmunk soul. And what he was doing was taking these old, nostalgic soul records, pitching them way up, and he wasn't just making a beat. He was injecting this shot of pure, uncut emotion straight into hip-hop. And it was groundbreaking. It was soulful, it was insanely catchy, and in a world of hard-edged grit, it just felt completely and totally fresh. And this right here just shows you the impact. The College Dropout wasn't just a hit record. It was a cultural earthquake. He was rapping about his faith on Jesus Walks, calling out consumerism on All Falls Down, questioning if a college degree was even worth it. These were topics nobody in the mainstream was touching. The album was a massive success, both critically and commercially, and it proved that, yeah, the stories of everyday life had a place at the very top of the charts. The kid that Jay-Z wasn't even sure about had just showed everybody what the future was gonna sound like. And he didn't just stop there. For his next album, Late Registration, he just doubled down on the ambition. He wasn't satisfied with just soul samples anymore. Nope. He spent $2 million of his own money to bring in a full orchestra. He was fusing hip-hop with these lush, cinematic strings, proving that the genre had absolutely no limits. By the time he gets to his third album, Kanye isn't just a star anymore. He's a full-blown icon. And he was ready to prove it in what turned into one of the most legendary sales battles in music history. The showdown was set, September 11th, 2007. Kanye dropped Graduation on the exact same day that 50 Cent released his album, Curtis. And this wasn't just about who sold more records. This was a symbolic fight for the soul of hip-hop. Was the future going to belong to the soulful, synth-heavy art pop of the Louis Vuitton Don, or the traditional, street-level grit of the G-Unit General? And the sound of Graduation was built for this kind of battle. After he went on tour with rock giants like U2 and the Rolling Stones, Kanye wanted to make hip-hop that could fill up a stadium. So he moved beyond just soul samples. He started sampling electronic acts like Daft Punk on Stronger, and just leaned into these massive synths to create these huge anthemic tracks. This wasn't just rap music anymore. This was arena rap. It was built for 50,000 people to shout every word. And the results, they were absolutely decisive. Graduation sold an insane 957,000 copies in its first week, completely crushing Curtis. It was a knockout punch. Hip-hop had chosen its new king, and the sound of the mainstream had officially shifted away from gangster rap. But just as he reached the absolute peak, the very top of his career, his entire world came crashing down. And that led to the most radical and influential sonic pivot of the entire decade. In November 2007, just 2 months after that triumphant win over 50 Cent, his mother, Donda West, who was his anchor, his biggest supporter, his manager, she died, suddenly. The loss was just profound, and it sent him into a spiral of grief that would change his music forever. He even said it himself. In the middle of all that grief, the bravado, the competition, the entire persona he'd built, it all just felt empty. He was done with rapping, at least the way he had been doing it. He needed a totally new language to express a kind of pain that words alone just couldn't capture. And that new language became 808s and Heartbreak. It was stark, it was cold, it was minimalist. He wasn't rapping, he was singing, his voice just drenched in autotune. But, and this is key, he wasn't using it to fix his pitch. He was using it as an instrument, a tool to create this feeling of robotic numbness and deep, alienating sorrow. It was raw, vulnerable, and sounded like absolutely nothing else in mainstream music. And its impact? Seismic, just massive. 808s kicked the door wide open for a whole generation of artists. You're talking Drake, Kid Cudi, to explore their own feelings of sadness, love, and loss in their music. It basically made it okay for rappers to be vulnerable. And you can still hear the echoes of that sound all over pop and hip-hop today. So after the stark, icy minimalism of 808s, Kanye came back in 2010. And it wasn't with a whisper. It was with a volcanic explosion of sound, color, and ego. It was the grand finale to his entire journey through the 2000s. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy was the exact opposite of 808s in every single way. It was this Baroque maximalist masterpiece. It was paranoid, it was celebratory, excessive, and just brilliant. He took every single style he'd ever touched, the soul samples, the orchestras, the synths, the autotune, and he blended them all into one epic, unapologetic statement about the ugly, intoxicating, and maddening world of modern fame. So when you look back at his first 5 albums, all laid out here, you see this clear, relentless evolution. Each album wasn't just a new batch of songs, it was a deliberate reaction to the one that came before it. It was a new blueprint for the sound of pop music. He was basically in a constant conversation with himself, always pushing, always changing the game. So yeah, he spent a decade proving everybody wrong, changing music 5 times over and becoming the most influential artist of his generation. But that leaves us with one final question, right? What happens when you spend 10 years operating at that level of creative genius? What kind of pressure does that build up inside a person? And how does that pressure ultimately shape the man you become?